Hi everyone, and the weather is cooperating in Sedona, although it's kind of chilly, but we're finally back in the weather that we're used to here after several weeks of unusual grey weather. So this week we start Module 2 of the course, and Module 2 is basically a history of our worldview, how we got here, how we got to as a society, as a culture, how did we get to this place? What's the thread of our history, especially in Western culture we're talking about. And so you'll have been reading about the Greek worldview this week, and I actually find the Greek worldview to be the history of the Greek worldview to be very fascinating, and because in a way it's so sophisticated, and in so many ways so much more sophisticated than the worldview as a modern society that we appear to have now. And so that's very interesting to me, and in going through the history of our worldview, of the Western worldview, what I find is that we discover the roots, our roots of where we've come from, and what we've acquired and what we've lost along the way. And these things are very significant because there are some profound things that we've lost along the way. And you'll see that there's a kind of a dialogue all the way through history between two kinds of different ways of working with the world. One of them you might call the sort of rational analytic, and the other you might call the intuitive, the more spiritual, the artistic, the connected to the cosmos kind of way of being. There's two different modes of being that have been at odds with one another, in some ways at odds with one another, all the way through history. And then there are particular characters throughout history that sort of epitomize the unity of those two ways of being. And I'm hoping there's not too much wind noise on the microphone. We'll see. So and so you'll see a number of these characters in the Greek section, and so it's these characters I find to be very important because they to me point the way towards the unification of two things. And I want to say right from the word go that I know as a class we're focused on this idea that there's science and then there's spirituality and religion, and we need to unify these two. That is actually a false view ultimately, and I hope by the end of the course we'll start to see that perspective that there's this and there's that, and that they need to be unified, is actually an erroneous way to look at the whole thing. And so when you see the characters that actually have, like Plato, Socrates, Pythagoras, that have these unified, it's not an issue for them. It's because there's something they're based in something that's prior to the separation of these two things, these two ideas. They're based in something that's more fundamental than this separation. And to me, that's the key. Ultimately, is for us to remember who we are, remember the source, remember what we're connected to, and then the separation becomes a sort of a moot point. But the course is about learning about science and spirituality and the history of the divide between the two, and so it's not necessarily about solving it, not because there's really nothing to be solved. So it's been an important dichotomy throughout our history, and it's important in our today's world. But for us, we're probably going to arrive at that point where there's nothing, where we understand there's nothing to be solved. But there are some important issues here that the more we know, then the more we know actually how to do science in a connected way. Science in the modern world, in general, is performed in a way that is not spiritual, is not connected. And so we do need to evolve. We do need to change the way we do science. At least this is the thesis of the course, is that we need, in becoming more conscious about the dichotomy, the divide that's happened between science and religion and spirituality, we might know how better to proceed with a different kind, in a different kind of way, with a different kind of sensibility in the doing of our science and in the doing of our religion. So there's a lot to be learned here, even if the division is not an issue for us individually. And so that's what I'm trying to communicate. So now I hope you get it, that I think Plato and Socrates as his mouthpiece is really brilliant, and there really isn't much more to say after you've gotten through Plato. There isn't much more to say about Western philosophy in my view, but of course there's a whole field of Western philosophy that says a lot after Plato. But Plato, in a way, was a very fundamental kind of genius, and the allegory of the cave is very key in this whole course, I feel like, and in general. So I'm curious to see what you make of it, and if it's useful to you or not. But from my perspective, it's a very brilliant allegory. So I'll get to your essays of this week were on your worldview. Your worldview is your worldview, so there's no question of my grading your worldview. I may well comment on it if there are interesting things to comment on what you've written. But the worldview ultimately is for you, because I'm wanting to see if going all the way through this course modifies what you think by the end of the course. And so this is kind of a marker point. Your statement of your worldview is kind of a marker point, and that's its primary purpose. Anyway, I hope that you enjoy reading about the Greeks. It's Greek philosophers. Was a remarkable time, and really, they had at least Plato had a very beautiful perspective on the universe, a very balanced, whole view of existence. So I hope you appreciate it, and I'll see you next week, and I hope you enjoy continuing the read. Next week it'll be going into a very key phase, because Christianity arose, of course, and so you've got 1,000 years or more than 1,000 years, almost 2,000 years of a Europe dominated by Christianity. And what did that do to science? And hopefully, ultimately, you'll see that it paved the way in quite a considerable way for the rising of science. So Christianity, even though we have the sense that with Galileo and whatnot, that Christianity was at odds with science, actually it is the soil in which science grew, and was very key for the development of science and the scientific revolution. All right, we'll see you next week.